Penn Cole, I am so excited to be sitting here with you and to get to dig into the creative mind of the Kindred's Curse saga.
I'm super excited to be here as well.
Well, I would love to dive in because I'm sure nobody wants me to waste your time because you have a very important book to be writing. We all want you to be very focused.
And I was working on it up until about 5 minutes ago. I promise I'm working very hard.
I believe you. I do. I completely believe you. And we'll just get this out of the way now. I'm sure you don't have any updates on when you can release dates or anything like that, right?
Not today, but we're hopeful that soon we'll be able to say something. So we'll see.
Okay, so May sounds very hopeful. May sounds like
my fingers are crossed as hard as they possibly can be. No one wants this announced more than me, I promise. Yeah. So yeah, and we're working as hard as we can to do it as quickly as we can.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. I just wanted to get that out of the way first because I'm sure it's the question that is burning on the edge of all of our minds. Unintended. All right. Well, let's just dive in. So I'm going to split these up into two different sections, and the first half of the questions are going to be hopefully spoiler free. If we end up having a little spoiler, I'll get it out and make sure it's removed that way. For these first several questions, if any readers have not gotten to these books yet, first of all, what are you doing with your lives? Hurry. And then second, enjoy these questions spoiler free. And then we'll transition to a more in-depth and detailed, and so all of the spoilers for those of us who have read and loved your incredible series. So I want to go back to the very beginning. What were your favorite books and TV shows growing up, and did any of them play into Kindred's Curse Saga?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. I mean, I was like a latchkey kid for sure. And I was raised by a single mom, and she couldn't always afford babysitters. She was working like 2 jobs. And so she sometimes would just go drop me off at the library, go drop me off at like half price books and say, okay, here's like $20 or, just go spend your day. Yeah. And I'll be back in, several hours. I mean, I spent like every summer at the library doing like the summer reading programs. Just so much of my life growing up was consumed with books. Yes. And I felt like I read every possible thing I could. I was always, of course, drawn to fantasy most of all. But when you spend that much time in the library, your interests expand. And I remember reading a ton of stuff, historical romances and sci-fi and futuristic stuff, dystopians, westerns, thrillers, like everything. And I read a lot of horror as well, but like kid horror, and I mean, like Goosebumps and that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it was really good for me in giving me a really well-rounded source of inspiration and helping me see stories in different ways, different structures, different types of characters. I can't say that there was like one thing I was absolutely obsessed with, but I just consumed as much as I possibly could. That was, I think, age appropriate and sometimes not age appropriate. The first book that I remember being like, oh my God, like that really left an imprint on me was the first Romantasy I ever read, which was Cushy'll Start by Jacqueline Carey. Talk about this book all of the time. I'll never stop talking about it. It came at a time for me when I was really in love with fantasy and reading a lot of fantasy, but not connecting with it as much because it was all about men and men going on adventures, men saving the world, and the women were either love interests or villains. And that was the first book I remember reading that had the feel of fantasy, where it was this new world and new gods and magic, and you really felt like you were transported to a different place. But the story was about a woman and being led by women, and women were saving the day. And I think that was a really foundational moment for me that shifted the way I looked at literature. And from there, I threw myself into a lot more books like that. I loved all of like Juliet Marillier's stuff, all of Anne Bishop's stuff, Nalini Singh. so many of these series that were kind of women carving out their place in fantasy at the time.
Yeah.
And all of those books just like bonded with my soul, you know, in a way that I think many of us who are readers at a young age, like it's just different. It hits different, you know, and it stays with you forever. And I think those are the books that really like left an imprint on my soul.
That's so good. Yes. I grew up in a very hyper Christian world, and I was only allowed to read the Christian version of all of these things. But oh my gosh, the way I reread them until like the pages were falling apart and whatnot.
Yeah.
They stick with you forever. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you also read like the Nancy Drews and the Hardy Boys and all those famous?
Oh yeah. I mean, at home, because of my sister had read like Sweet Valley High, and we had Nancy Drew, and you know, all of those, Babysitters Club, all of those things that I mean, inhaled. All the Goosebumps books, all of those. Yeah, those were on constant rotation at home for sure.
I loved them. I loved all of them. It's a good thing there were so many.
Exactly.
All right. So then, so you've mentioned before that the story for Kindred's Curse was in your head for years. So 2-part question. What originally inspired the idea? And what gave you the courage to finally put the proverbial pen to paper?
So I can't exactly say without spoiling a little bit of Spark. What I will say is what happened at the very end of Spark is the first scene that I saw in my head. And for those who have not yet read, to discuss it in vague terms, it's kind of a moment where DM, our main character, her life changes completely, and she is sort of shoved out of her little small village and into the larger world. And something happens that really forces her to leave her bubble and explore the bigger world and people that she's never met before, you know, societies that she shut herself off from and had shut her out of. And it's very much a kind of a classic fantasy fish out of water moment where, you know, your main character is plucked out of their tiny village and like shoved into the magical world. And I think maybe because I'd read that story so many times over and over again, I really wanted to take it and put a different spin on it, or at least put my own spin on it. And so that was, I always kind of envisioned that scene or that moment as the start of the story. And actually, when I began writing Spark, when I began writing the series, that was one of the very first scenes. So in reality, Glow was really the first book in the series at the beginning. And it wasn't until I got about halfway through writing Glow that I said, okay, actually, we need to start way before that moment happens, because so often in fantasy, you see that moment and it happens right at the beginning. And so your main character is off on this big adventure and they're remembering the people they left behind, or, you know, the little village or home that they're fighting for. Right. But because you only saw it for a few pages, you just don't care about it as much. Sure. And because it's so critical to who DM is and her story and her motivations, I knew that I wanted to see more of that world and more of those people so that we could truly understand her and the decisions that she makes for the rest of the series. Right. So that's kind of how the story grew as I started working on it. In terms of why I finally started writing it, it was really during the pandemic. So I've wanted to write my entire life. It's what my undergrad, I have an undergrad and graduate degree in writing. And so I always wanted to do it, but I just kept putting it off and saying, well, I need to get a more stable job, you know, a regular paycheck, blah, blah, blah. And this is just a hobby. This is something I'll do in my free time, sure, which I regret so much now. But at the time, I kind of bought into that belief that, you know, arts are like a hobby, not a career. And I always said, maybe next year I'll write it. Maybe next year I'll write it. And next year just got busier and busier and busier, you know, as you advance in your career. And then the pandemic happened and my husband and I decided to move here to France. And I had to leave my job as an attorney as part of that move. and I was applying for jobs, but it was a pandemic and no one was hiring. So I was unemployed, and it didn't look like that situation was changing anytime soon. And my very sweet husband said, maybe now's the time to like pursue that dream that you've had, as long as I've known you. And so with his support, I decided, okay, I'm going to take a year. I'm going to stop interviewing for jobs, and I'm going to write this book and give a year of my life to this process. And it was the happiest year I think I've had in my entire life. I must have turned to my husband so many times during that year and said, I'm happier than I've ever been. It was like I was finally doing what I was meant to do. You know what I mean? That's how I felt, at least. And so at the end of that year, when the prospect arose of, okay, now it's time to go back to like the real world, so to speak, I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave this thing that I loved so much. And so I said, well, then I guess I'm just going to have to make a living doing this. And so I threw myself completely into self-publishing, and here we are now.
Wow. That's amazing. And thank goodness you took that courageous step. Otherwise, all of us would be missing out on this world that was fully formed in your head and ready to be manifested.
It is very wild to see how it has grown in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. And did I read that when you did sit down to write Spark, that it all came out in like 3 weeks?
Oh yeah, it just flooded out of me.
So wild.
Came so quickly. Writing Spark, yeah, it was less than a month, and it was wild. I was not sleeping, and my husband would have to be like, babe, you have to sleep. And I'm like, but the scene, like, I'm loving this scene and I know exactly what happens next. And he would like drag me to bed, and I'd be hiding under the covers on my phone, like writing out the next scene, because I couldn't go to sleep without like getting it out of my head.
Yes.
It was just that thing where I could not stop writing.
Right.
And I mean, it was just like my body was finally allowing itself to do the thing it had been wanting to do for so long.
Oh my gosh. So it's basically like authors have their own version of the one more chapter syndrome.
Oh yeah.
But instead of read one more chapter, I've got to write one more chapter. I've got to
Oh my gosh. Yes. It's the hardest thing in the world to pull myself. I know some authors have a hard time getting themselves to write. I have a hard time pulling myself from writing, because whatever I go do next, my brain is still on like, okay, but what if they do this next? Like, maybe it would be cooler if we did this.
I love that so much. I don't think I've ever heard an author say that like, I've got one more chapter syndrome too. It's just the author version instead of the reader version.
Oh yeah. No, we do. I mean, if you talk to any author, they'll tell you like if they're showering or if they're cleaning their house, their brain is with their characters.
Right.
Like, still telling that story. It's really hard to pull ourselves out of that world.
Well, we can identify. I love that. I love that so much. Okay, so when you would write one of those iconic Luther lines, did you ever giggle and kick your feet like we do when we read them?
Oh, 100%. It doesn't feel like it's coming from me. It really doesn't. I mean, when I'm writing these characters, it truly feels like I'm watching it happen, and I'm just transcribing what's happening in front of me, because like that, nothing he says is like something I would say in real life, I feel like. And so I'm just like,
but you don't have to go around telling everybody to glow so bright.
Okay, Prince. Right? Like, go off, Prince. I love it. He has a mind of his own. That they all have minds of their own. It's I know the words come from me, but it does not feel like it at all. It truly feels like they are real people, and I can't control them, and they're just doing their thing.
I love that. What do you do to give flesh and blood to this person in your head? Do you work with personality tests? Like, how do you get them into that fully formed person?
I mean, I spend a lot of time just honestly sitting and thinking. My husband will always come in my office, and I'm just like staring at the wall, and he's like, hello? Like, are you with us? And honestly, I'm like watching these characters kind of go off and do their own thing and have their own and so many conversations that never make it into the book, but I just like see them play out in my head. And the more that happens, the more that I learn about them. It's for sure a process that happens over the course of the book and writing it. It's funny now that I go back and I reread Spark, or if I'm writing bonus chapters for earlier in the series, I have to like remind myself that there was a time when they were a different person than they are now, because they've all changed so much over the books. But no matter how much time you spend thinking about them, there's only so much planning you can do until you start writing them, really.
Sure.
And so I think a big part of fleshing them out is honestly just writing the draft.
Yeah.
And then going back and tweaking. And, sometimes I'll get to the end of the book and I'll go back to the beginning and say, no, this isn't who they are. And I'll have to tweak a scene because at the time I didn't know them as well then as I know them now. And it's a strange feeling, but you really do get to know them as you create them.
Yeah, I love that. That's super cool. Do you have any favorite Luther lines that just like, that's one of my favorite lines I've ever written?
There's a moment, so there's actually several moments, and everyone knows I love Henry. Okay. Henry's my baby. He's my wayward sheep that's misunderstood. Yes. Okay. But there are moments in the series where DM has the same conversation with Henry and then with Luther, or faces the same challenge, or something that's sort of a parallel.
Right.
And the way that they respond differently to those moments says a lot about them and their relationship with her.
Yeah.
And one of them is at the end of Spark. DM says to Henry, "Let's run away." She's just panicking and she's overwhelmed by everything that's going on in her life. And so she says, let's run away. Let's start a new life. We'll have adventures somewhere else. And Henry, very rightfully so, is like, girl, what are you talking about? Like, we have a life here. We have family and obligations and jobs. Like, you can't just run away from your problems.
Right.
And I think that's the sane response. Like, that's very much what she needed to hear in that moment, for sure. At least like practically speaking.
Yeah.
But she has the same moment in Heat where she's feeling very overwhelmed by everything that's facing her. And she says the same thing to Luther. And he says, okay, where are we going? What are we doing? Like, what's our adventure going to be? Where are we going to go? And he sort of plays along with her, and they talk about this little home that they'll build on the ocean side and the farm that they'll have with apples and, goats. And it's this really cute moment. And I think maybe some people think he's being serious and that he truly would abandon everything, abandon his family and everything for her. I don't think that that's it. It was really about Luther knows her well enough to know she's not actually going to go anywhere, right? DM may run emotionally, but she's not the type to actually abandon people in their time of need. And so I think in that moment, she just needed to know that no matter what decision she made, even if it was the wrong one, that she wouldn't do it alone, and that she would have somebody who would stand by her side, even if she did the wrong thing. Because she was very, very scared of doing the wrong thing. Sure. And I think Luther knew that about her. And he knew that what she really wanted in that moment was to just not feel alone.
Yeah.
And so he let her have that escapism in that moment of like, yeah, I'll be with you, girl. Let's do it. Like, wherever you go, I'm going with you.
Yeah.
And both of them knew, I think, the whole time that they're not going to do it. They're going to stay here. They're going to face it. They're going to confront these hard things.
Absolutely.
But he knew what she needed emotionally, you know? And I think that really speaks to the differences between Henry and Luther and their relationship to her. And not that either of them is necessarily good or bad, but they feed different parts of her. And that's really the choice that she had to make, is which part of me is the most important, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also experienced that part as like Luther giving her an out, just because sometimes I feel like we need to know we have an out.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if we don't want one.
Right.
We know we want to stay the course, but if we feel trapped, then we feel that much more panicked and we can't be clear-minded and all these different things. So it felt like he was also just being like, we could leave. You're not trapped.
Yeah.
but I know you're going to choose to stay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I just love that moment for them and just what it meant to both of them.
Mm-hmm. I think so many of us, when we don't have that person, we dream of having that person that they see what we're really asking for, and they're like, "I see you. I see what you're really getting at, and so I'm gonna meet you there." You know, like it's just for someone to know us that well. It's just, I think that's what everybody wants. You know, so.
And I think that's the best for me. It's my favorite part of Diem and Luther's sort of, you know, the relationship between them is he sees what she doesn't say and what she won't admit that she needs. And he pushes her in that way of like, I know you're saying X, but I know what you really need is Y. And so I'm going to give you Y because I know that's what you actually need. And sometimes that means challenging her and saying no. And sometimes it means going along with her crazy schemes because, you know, she needs to not be alone.
Right. Yeah. I love that. But I just love him. So that's
I know.
You know? Oh. Okay. So while we all love Luther, I have to ask, if someone was holding a Godstone dagger to every side character, who would you save? You could only save one. Who do you save, Penn? Who do you run to?
Okay. I feel like people might misinterpret this because my answer is probably going to be Taryn because he's the most fun and he's the most like me. But I don't think anyone should interpret that as him being safe in the series because I very much will kill my darlings if I think it's the right choice. So if I'm holding the gun, you know, even though I kind of metaphorically am, he's my favorite. I love him to death. But you know, I don't know. Sometimes your favorite's gotta go. So we'll see what happens.
You're scaring me. But then again, I think you thrive on all of our suffering.
I do. I love it. It's my favorite thing.
My food is the fear of my readers.
Reader tears. They're delicious.
I love that. Okay. All right. So slightly different direction. Did your history with art and law impact how you write or the direction of your story?
I think so. There's a huge lawyer to author pipeline. It's massive. I think readers would be shocked at how many of their favorite authors were attorneys in the past life. I think part of that is because as attorneys, a big part of our job is like imagining all of the things that can go wrong. And that's really similar to being an author, even though we're the ones making everything go wrong. But we have to kind of imagine what's the worst case scenario. And as attorneys, we try and prevent it. As authors, we ensure that it definitely happens. And so that I think there is a little bit of overlap, and like you don't think of being an attorney as a creative field, but it really truly is. You constantly have to be imagining different scenarios and really understanding people's character, what they might do, their motives. That's so critical in both law and in writing. So I understand why there is a big overlap there. And I think that definitely, I mean, I already wanted to be an author before I became an attorney, but I think being an attorney helped me sharpen to those skills quite a bit and probably made me a better author for having been an attorney. And then I was a photographer in a life before that. And I've had many different careers. I'm a true millennial. Like I get bored every few years. I have to change my job. That I think actually I learned more from the business side of that because I worked first in somebody else's studio and then opened my own. And then I moved overseas and opened a studio in Europe. And I was very much a business owner, an entrepreneur for nearly a decade. And I think that really prepared me for self-publishing because, you know, I had to do everything. I had to do customer service, legal, sales, marketing, every aspect of the business I had to really have a hand in. And it's the same way when you're a self-published author, you are the publisher also. And so you have to have a hand in every aspect of that book getting to market and everything after. So when it came to publishing, I really wasn't scared or intimidated by self-publishing because it just felt like an extension of what I was already doing in running my businesses.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they both really helped me develop the skills that are part of why I think I have been able to be successful in publishing earlier in my career than most.
That's so cool. It's so interesting when you think like, oh, it's all this wasted time because like what I really want to do is this, but you never know what skills you are developing, or even just like resilience or whatever it is, heading into the right thing or the next right thing, because of everything you've experienced in the past. And so I think that's so cool because it's like I'm gathering from every experience and I'm going to pull it and I'm going to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would have been a very different author if I had started right out of college like I wanted to. And I don't know, maybe it would have been better. Maybe who knows what would have happened. But I think the experiences that I've had have certainly made me a better author and have made just publishing a lot easier to sort of dive into.
Right. Yeah. I love that. And I think that's hopefully encouraging to a lot of people because I think so many of us have these fantasy stories in the back of our minds and we're like, oh, am I wasting all my time doing this? And it's like, maybe not. Maybe you are getting exactly what you need to be able to build the kind of thinking that will be required in the series that is forming in your head, you know?
Absolutely.
I love that. I love that. Okay. One more spoiler-free question, and then we'll head into those spoilers. If you could go to any physical place in Amarian for 10 minutes, where would it be and why?
I think Umbros because it's terrifying, but it seems like so much fun.
Yeah.
It's a really cool place. It's a place I wish that we could have spent like the whole series because can you imagine the stories that have gone down in that realm? Like the characters who it would be so interesting to follow. I think it would be, I mean, I'm not sure I would survive longer than a day for sure, but it would be a really fun day.
It really would. We are considering trying to go for an Umbros market feel on the bottom floor of the Everflame ball. So we are very hopeful and excited for that.
I love it.
It's
like a scary place because, you know, it's dark and anything goes and, you know, no one's going to save you. Like you're really on your own down there. But at the same time, it's a very egalitarian place where you have mortals and half mortals and descended, and they're all mixing and they're all friends, they're colleagues. There's not really any divide between them like there is in all of the other realms.
Right.
And so I love that aspect of it, that it's a really diverse place where people, other than, you know, the centenaries that kind of run things, but they really keep to themselves. They kind of stay, as long as you pay your taxes, like they don't bother you.
Right.
And so for everybody else, it really is just like, you're all equal, figure it out. And I think there's something kind of beautiful about that.
There is. I love that. And I feel like so many spin-off books could come just from that
right?
one location.
Yeah, exactly.
There are a million stories hidden in that market.
Yeah.
I love that. I did find one more question that is spoiler-free that I just had to ask. Last one. Okay. So romance books, Romantasy included, are often criticized for setting up false expectations for women. What do you think about those comments?
I mean, I think everything sets up false expectations for women. I think life generally, any media, TV, film, books, whatever, in part because art is often our escapism. And if we wanted reality, we would just walk outside of our door and go experience it, right? But part of, you know, throwing ourselves into art in whatever form is getting a little bit of a reprieve from that reality and you know, just maybe letting go of maybe not every trouble, because obviously these things have lots of trouble and conflict and stress, but at least selectively, you know, and knowing that for example, knowing in romance that, you know, you'll have your happily ever after, or, you know, knowing that there's even going to be a romance, at least, you know, that you will have someone at least that you can fall in love with and sort of have those butterfly in your tummy kind of feelings. And when going out in the real world and doing that can be dangerous or can be disappointing or, maybe not always super attractive.
Right.
Being able to do it safely within the confines of a book, knowing we can set it down when we need to, or knowing that there are almost these kind of barriers that we know will stay within.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a little bit of it's a safe space, which I know is a hot button term,
Sure.
but it is a little bit of a safe space where we can kind of enjoy things and try out different lives, try out different kinds of people without the consequences that come in the real life. I think people who say that maybe like underestimate the intelligence of readers. Like, I don't think there are many people who are reading these and saying, yeah, like this is what I want in real life. Like, I think this would be a great thing if it happened in real life.
Right.
I think most of us know that a man who would literally kill people for us is probably not what we want in real life, right? But the fantasy is fun. The escapism is fun. Being able to imagine ourselves in that situation without the danger of it actually happening is fun.
Right.
And I think readers are intelligent enough to know that it's not real and that it's just play,
Sure. Because there's the both that it's like we love the idea of touch her and die and that level of protectiveness, but I wouldn't actually want to be concerned that my husband was going to go off this person that just flirted with me at a bar. I don't actually want to be concerned for that. But I think it also is a good reminder for a lot of readers of like not to settle for someone who mistreats you.
Yeah, definitely.
Hopefully.
And I think it's telling that these kind of conversations only really happen when it comes to stuff women love. Because nobody's saying that about like men who love Game of Thrones or anything like that, right? And like that's not realistic either.
Right.
Or even when we think of children who are like playing sword fights with like wrapping paper tubes, like we're not saying, oh, this is setting unrealistic expectations for life, or if they pretend to be princesses or whatever.
Right.
It's play. It's using your imagination. It's having fun for a little while. Yeah. And it really only seems to be when grown women are having fun that people want to police it or judge it or cast, judgment on it. And I just think that that's silly.
How dare we go back to our childhood loves and
right? God forbid.
That's it.
Right.
I love that. Okay. All right. So we are officially transitioning into spoiler territory. So
I'm ready.
You have not finished all the books. You have been warned. I don't know what spoilers are going to come in from which books at which time. So if you're in the middle of the series, I just recommend maybe listen later. Okay. All right. So first one I want to ask, if Diem and Luther were sharing the story of how they met with their grandkids, because I'm believing they're both going to be okay and that they're going to have a happy ending, despite your threats, Penn Cole. If they were sharing the story of how they met with their grandkids, how would they call themselves enemies to lovers? Because Diem obviously considered him an enemy, but it feels like Luther never really did.
Oh yeah, for sure. She would. He would not. He definitely would not. I think he was taken aback by how much she didn't like him at the beginning. I think he was kind of stunned because this is a man who lives in a world where everybody, even the people who are scared of him, suck up to him and they want to get on his good side and they want to be near him or with him or it's the sort of cachet that he has as the heir impacts every relationship that he has pretty much. And I think Diem was probably the first person in his life who did not care.
Right.
At first didn't know, but even when she knew, she didn't treat him any differently. She was ready to take him to task for his role in, this unjust government, this, unfair regime that her people lived under.
Right.
And she wasn't intimidated by it. Well, she was a little intimidated by it, but she didn't show it for sure. Yes. And she was happy to challenge him, to insult him, to call him out. And that's just not something he experienced at all. So I think he less so than being like angry or hating her, was just like befuddled by who is this woman? Why does she have gray eyes? Because I was not expecting that. And what role does she play in all of this?
Right.
And why does she hate me so much?
Right.
I think, we see him kind of say, that when he first sees her, he imagines that Lumnos put her there to help him, right? And that the two of them together are going to serve Lumnos.
Right.
And that she's like another disciple. So when he finds out that she really hates the Kindred, and she was like not at all a disciple of Lumnos, he's really like, what the hell is going on?
Right.
So I think he spends a good part of book one and a good chunk of book two just trying to figure out who she is and like what her intentions are. DM, I think, for sure saw him as an enemy for a very long time, probably too long, I think most readers would say.
Right.
But with knowing what she knew about him and the role that he had played, the titles that he held, I think that was deserved,
Sure.
And especially with her just now having a crown, how can you, just in the same way that Luther really struggled to trust anybody because he doesn't know if they're using him, she really struggled to say, are they using me? Can I trust this kindness, or is it just, a front? Which is a big part of why she pulled Eleanor in, because Eleanor was like, yeah, I kind of am using you, but like maybe you can help me.
Right.
And meanwhile, Luther's like, no, I'm not using you. I don't want anything from you. And that it was harder, I think, for DM to trust, even though it was true in the end.
Right. Well, because she couldn't see his motives. He didn't reveal his motives for a long time.
Kept so many secrets.
Exactly.
And important ones about her mother, which, how is she supposed to trust him at that point? So I think she would very much say, yeah, this guy, I did not trust this guy for a long time. But he, I think, was a very different story.
Right. Okay. So that pairs off into two different questions I have. So with Luther, was he completely intrigued by the fact that she just did not care? Because you also mentioned in another interview that you grew up in the Pride and Prejudice generation, and the Matthew McFadden hand flag. I just went and saw that for the 20th anniversary in theaters, and it was
so good.
But I forgot how much in Pride and Prejudice he's so used to everybody fawning over him and everything. And so when she's just like, I don't care, and she'll even like be snippy with him, he's just so shocked every time. And it feels a lot like Luther and DM. And
actually, now that you mention it, it kind of does.
Okay, so it wasn't an intentional, like, I'm going to do a nod to Pride and Prejudice.
It wasn't intentional, no, but those are my favorite kind of MMCs. Like, I love the grumpy, angry, like, misanthrope who just hates everyone, is rude to everyone, and then this like Tasmanian devil of a woman comes in and throws their life, up into shambles. And they're sort of like, who are you? I am obsessed with any book, any story that's like that. And so I think I wanted to write my own for sure.
I love that. Yeah. No, it just with both of those male characters, it was just like, you're being rude to me? I think I love you.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Which is just so great. It just makes me laugh. Especially when culture is often like, it's silencing to women. So for a man to be intrigued by a woman who like speaks her mind and isn't even a little bit rude and impetuous about it, like it's so much permission that we are worthy of love no matter how we are wired as women. We don't have to be quiet or submissive or whatever it is.
Exactly. He loved her because she was opinionated and bold and strong. And it wasn't like I love her despite that. It was very much the reason that he thought she was so special.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. You also mentioned with Luther about all of the lies that he was keeping. So, and I was thinking about it last night about how there are lots of characters that lie to their loved ones because they feel like it's the right thing. You know, Arlie to Diem, Luther to Diem, Diem to Taryn. You know, so for a minute I was like, oh, everyone's lying to Diem, but then I was like, wait a minute, Diem did it too.
They're all lying to each other.
Yes, and so I was just curious, like, do you think? Like, what are your thoughts? This I mentioned at the beginning that I like to dive into the philosophy. Do you think love drives us to make these choices, and do you think they're defensible because of our motives, or do you think, like, because I wasn't able to pick up on what you think about that, the fact that they were lying to each other?
I think the question of when and where do the ends justify the means is a big theme through a lot of different things in the series. Because we see it a lot with the war and the Guardians, and like, okay, they have very noble goals and motives, but the things that they're doing are very objectionable. And even a lot of the Descended, you look at like somebody absolutely awful like Martha Hanna-Vare. She's a terrible person. She's doing terrible things, but she's doing them to protect her family and to protect her grandchildren and their future. And in her mind, that justifies everything because her family is everything to her. And, you know, you see it with so many couples and friendships where they do, you know, an objectionable thing because they think it's the only way to save or protect somebody they really care about. And in most of them, almost all of them face consequences for that, you know, pretty rough ones. Does that mean it was the wrong decision? I don't know. A lot of these, I think, maybe were the right decision with the information they had at the time. But that doesn't mean making the right decision doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences, you know? I think one decision in particular that I think about a lot is Arlie and her decision not to tell Diem the truth about, you know, who she is and her background. And that's certainly a decision that gets her a lot of flack. But it's, I don't know that it was the wrong decision, because if you think about it, like if people found out about Diem, she would die. She would be put to death. Arlie would probably also be put to death. Andre and Teller might be put to death too, just by association, you know? And she, at the time, Diem was very young. She was only 10. Can you trust a 10-year-old to keep that secret? Especially Diem, who is kind of wild and rebellious. Like, can you be sure she's not going to use her magic if she knows that she has it in a situation to protect her brother or family or just someone in need? You know, she's a very compassionate person. There's just, I think, a lot about the situation that Arlie was in at the time that I think if I was in her shoes, I probably would have done the same thing and lied and done whatever I could to like keep my daughter safe and my family safe until she's old enough to be trusted with this truth, you know, on her own. Now, did she wait too long to tell her? Maybe there's a strong argument for that, right? But at the same time, I think, you know, when Diem did find out the truth, she was devastated. It like destroyed her. And I think Arlie knew her daughter well enough to know that that would be the case. And she wanted to give her that normalcy and the happiness, because Diem was happy. You know, she lived a happy life. And I think she wanted to prolong that for her daughter as long as she reasonably could. So as much as people really think she's awful for having kept that secret, and Luther certainly does, I don't know that I would have made a different choice in her shoes, you know, and I think most moms probably would have made the same choice too. So all that to say, there's a lot of situations in this book where people do controversial things for really good reasons. And that, I think, is a very much a reflection of life in the real world and what all of us face all the time. Maybe not on this level, life and death, world saving level, but certainly in our lives, in our friendships, you know, in work, in anything that we do, especially if you find yourself in a position of leadership.
Yeah.
It's certainly something you face quite a bit.
Right.
So I don't think I personally have an answer, yes or no.
Yeah.
I just like exploring the question, and I
Mm-hmm.
like asking readers to explore that question and really think deeply about if they were in those shoes, what would they have done? Like
Okay.
really, really, what would you have done? Not as a reader saying, "Oh, she should tell him," but like
Sure.
really, truly, if you're in those shoes and knowing what you know and with the consequences you face, what would you do?
Sure.
I think they're really interesting and really difficult mental questions.
Sure. Well, as a redheaded mom myself, I can identify quite a bit. I have a feisty 8-year-old daughter who thinks that she knows everything and should know everything that she does not
Uh-huh.
know.
Of
And,
course.
if we were in that situation, she would think she should need to know. And I would think, you don't have the maturity for this.
Exactly.
And I want you to have as happy of a life as possible for as long as possible, because there are hardly any stories, I would think, out of that world where a half mortal, half descended lived a normal life and got to be happy and lived the full length of it and nobody find out and
Exactly.
try to take them down. I'm sure that story was next to non-existent.
Right. Yeah. And
And
if
so,
she had, I mean, if Diem had stopped taking the flamer earlier, Luther would have sensed her magic. He already did
yeah,
sense her magic. And eventually, I think he would have found her.
yeah,
And or somebody else might have found her because, a lot of different people could sense her magic.
right.
So there's no telling if she had if Diem had gone off the flamer any earlier than she did, it really could have ended badly for like
Mm,
a lot of our favorite characters.
that's true. That's so true. It all happened the way that it was supposed to. I love that. Yeah. Okay. So then I was going to ask, and maybe you can't answer this, and that's okay. But in this last book, are we going to understand the relationship between the kindred and the old gods? Like, will we see or hear from any of them, or is that going to remain mysterious?
You will learn quite a bit about both.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
That is a big part of the world we have not yet explored.
Right.
We've been laying little bits and pieces of it, but
Yeah.
that is a huge part of the next book for sure.
Okay. I was wondering because you were building up all this almost like tension, like the kindred came out of nowhere and what happened to the old gods. And so I
Yeah.
just created all these questions and I've just been wondering for 3 whole books. I'm glad we get to explore that piece of the world. That'll be really fun. I'll only ask a couple more questions. I know your voice
No,
is a
you're
little
okay.
tired.
You're okay.
I want you to go rest and then, dive back in or whatever schedule for the day. Okay, so say we were to get some semblance of a happy ending in book 4. How would you see the descended and mortals learn how to live together and respect each other? How do you see that reflected in all of the modern division between nearly every group of humans, Republican, Democrat, racial discrimination,
Yeah.
men versus women, like all of that? That's certainly Diem and Luther's dream that they're headed towards, is this unity. And so, do you have in your mind what does that look like practically?
That is a great question. And it's something I think about all of the time and have been thinking about since the earliest days of imagining this story.
Yeah,
Um, because there is no easy answer, right? If there was
right.
the simple, easy solution where, oh, if you just do X, everybody will be happy together, we would have
Mm-hmm,
done it in the real world. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
If there was a system of government or a way of bringing two factions together that was simple and easy, like we would have solved all of the world's problems.
yep,
The reality is that there isn't. And
right,
everything that you do has drawbacks, has consequences. It creates a whole new set of problems.
right.
So I think the ending for this world is going to be one of like a hopeful first step.
Mm,
It's going to be, okay, we're going to try and do this. And we know there's going to be issues. We know this is not going to be the end of, discrimination or groups fighting, with each other or whatever. But
right.
we're going to do everything that we can to prevent it And then you just have to hope that the idealism that, Diem and Luther and some of these characters have will outlive them and, will stay in this society long past the time, that they walk the earth.
Right.
There's actually a scene, if I can talk about it without giving too much away, there is a scene in Burn where we get a first step towards a possible future, and it doesn't quite go to plan. And one of the things that I love about that part of the book is how realistic it is.
Yes.
And it's not okay, we'll just do this and then things will be better.
Right.
It's we're going to do this, and all new problems that we either thought would not come for a long time or didn't even foresee are already happening at day one. And this is going to be harder than we think.
Right.
So it's not going to be easily resolved, but I think we'll end it with a hopeful outlook for the future.
Yeah. I love that. I think there you hinted at pieces of that so far, and I think about like Alix and Taryn, how Diem took them throughout Mortal Village and showed them this is what we lived with. This is what people who look like me and had my life, this is what they've gone through, and the struggles, and how eye-opening it was for them. And I loved their response too, that it wasn't just, oh, this is an attack on us. It makes me think about the idea of white guilt, right? That it's not about this, like, you're screwed up and there's no redemption for you. It's like, no, you need to open your eyes and you need to put yourself in somebody else's shoes so that whatever power you have available to you, you use it for everyone's good.
Yeah, exactly. There's a really great article that I reread like constantly. And it's I think a Huff Post article. And it's titled, I can't make you care about other people if you don't. And or I can't teach you how to care about other people, something like that. And the gist of this article is that there is a huge divide between the people who fundamentally care about other people who are different than them and want to protect them, even if it doesn't benefit them personally, or even if it costs them personally.
Right.
And the people who are very much just, it's about me, I'm here to protect myself, and that's all I care about. And I'll only help you if it doesn't also cost me something.
Right.
And I think that divide is like really stratifying our society quite a bit more and more with every year. And we see that in the book as well. We see people like Taryn and Alix who have a lot of compassion, even though they didn't make the best choices and they were on the wrong side for a very long time. It didn't come from a place of hate. It came from a place of ignorance. And once their eyes were open to it, and once Diem really forced them to see, then they cared and they wanted to help. And then there are other people like the Hand of Errors who they know and they've seen it and they just don't care because it's about them and protecting themselves. And so I think we see what we see in the book in terms of different characters' reactions to being confronted with this injustice is very much a mirror of the real world and the different reactions we see, when people in our world are sort of pulled out of their comfortable bubbles and forced to look at, how people who are less fortunate, the things they have to deal with.
That's right. So it seems like it requires a degree of humility, of recognizing how you've participated in something, even if you didn't understand how you were participating in it. Without being defensive, just accepting, like, okay, this was not a willing and knowing participation, but it was still a participation. And what does that look like to take ownership? And then there's the compassion and empathy side of like learning, like you said, like it's not just about me and people I identify with, those people groups that I would acclaim as part of my identity. It's it's about all of us and our collective experience and being able to find that common ground and find that empathy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's powerful. It's tricky ground.
It's tricky.
Especially in the
There's
political
no
climate.
easy answer. There's no easy answer. And I truly believe, and this is reflected in my books, that most people, there are some, but I think most people do not come from a place of hate or wanting others to hurt, right? I think there are, of course, a couple in this book that are that way, but 95% of the people, both in the book and in my opinion in the world, aren't trying to hurt anyone else. They just maybe don't see the path. They don't agree on the path forward. And that's, very much the problem in the book as well, is, okay, maybe we all agree that we want a world where like it's fair and, everybody's safe, but like, how do we get there? And what are we willing to give up to get there? And that's where, people have very strong differences.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it seems like your goal is not so much to answer these questions of what does all of this look like, but to encourage all of us to be asking these questions of what am I participating in without really understanding what I'm contributing to, like problems. We all like to see ourselves as the victim of the problem. It's much harder to acknowledge where we are part of the problem. And so like, creating those questions and what would it look like to make a difference and stuff like that. And so I was curious, you are clearly intentionally creating these questions, but do you have any thoughts about, like the little guy, what I think so many of us feel helpless. And I think that's why we stop tuning into the news, and we'd rather read about somebody else's fake political issues than think about our very real ones. And so, what do you see people doing that is effective to push back against that helplessness? And then do you think there's anything that we are doing as a culture that is less helpful and that actually maybe it's the right impact or excuse me, right intention, but the impact actually creates more division? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that is a big question.
It is.
I have lots of thoughts, but it's a very big question for sure.
Yes.
I think one thing that was in my author note, maybe for Glow, might have been for Heat, but it was in one of my author notes, and I talked about, I'm pretty sure it was Glow. I talked about how when we want to battle injustice, discrimination, things like that, it's very easy to like yell at others that we think are worse. And not that there's not a place for that. Certainly, that kind of stuff should always be called out in every situation when we see, hateful behaviors. But I think the work that often goes undone and is probably the most important is the work we do internally on ourselves. I have had a long journey in my sort of activism, my journey in activism and in social justice spaces, where I've had to be called in and I've had to have people say like, okay, your heart's in the right place, but like, you're doing more harm than good with some of the ways you're trying to be, you're trying to be active, and like borrowed outrage and coming at people from a place of like really harsh, intense judgment and criticism when you're in the privileged position, right? Like the people who have actually faced that discrimination and that oppression, they have a right to be angry and to speak angrily about their situation. Those of us who are trying to be allies, that's borrowed outrage. That's not, we should be indignant on their behalf, but not making the situation worse by turning people away and shutting off their ears and not even trying. It's on us to do the work of changing hearts and minds. And sometimes that means doing work internally and facing our own internalized biases, our own sort of the microaggressions that we do and don't even realize that we're doing. There's so much work we all can do in ourselves that will make a huge difference in our day-to-day lives and the people that engage with us. My goal is always to try my hardest to be a safe place for the people around me who come from, marginalized groups. But that means like actively learning, right? Going out and educating myself and not sitting and waiting on them to educate me. But going and learning about microaggressions, going and learning about you know, the different opinions that groups have on things like cultural appropriation, or you know, just things like this that maybe you wouldn't know about unless you like actually go educate yourself.
Right.
And you know, when people call me out, like being willing to hear them and listen and really stop and think, okay, my intentions were good, but does that matter? Like, did what I say still hurt someone?
Right.
That's what matters, you know, impact over
Yeah.
intent. So I would say anyone who's feeling overwhelmed or feeling, you know, like they're not sure where to start with yourself.
Right.
Educate yourself, learn, read as many books as you can on social justice. Make sure you're diversifying your life. If you look around and all you see are people who look just like you, that's a problem. If the art that you're consuming, the TV, movies, and books are all about people who look like you and they're all written by people who look like you, like that's a problem.
Right.
And so like work on, you know, getting things right yourself first and foremost.
Right.
And in many ways that can lead to a lot of sort of consequential good in the lives of the people around you, especially if you're talking about it and saying, here's what I'm doing and here's why, here's what I learned, sharing all of that information with the people in your life. That can have a real butterfly effect in a positive way.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting. I think you are right that those of us who are allies of these different marginalized groups, but we have not had those experiences. I feel like it's a lot like how you crafted DM and Luther to be, where they are part of both worlds and they care about both worlds. And so they are human bridges trying to not force one side to change and then the other side's completely excused. It's like, no, both of us need to like look at things from a different perspective to be able to find that common ground of that human experience. And so I almost imagine us as like as stone bridges. You know, it's not our job to do the attacking or anything else. It's like we are connecting two groups of people that refuse to listen to each other, that refuse to hear each other out, that refuse to, and not to say that there's very much responsibility on the marginalized groups, but in terms of at least offering forgiveness, you know, or allowing people on the other side to ask questions, or, you know, I would obviously, I think on those of us who are in positions of privilege, that the responsibility is mostly on us, but still there has to be that middle ground found.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I mean, DM, a big part of her journey in Glow is confronting her own prejudices and realizing that she was so angry and indignant about the treatment of the mortals, and she absolutely had every right to be. Sure. And she had to learn, as she got to know more of the Descended, that she was, you know, prejudiced too. Right. And she was painting them all with the brush of the worst of them, which is exactly what they were doing to the mortals. Yeah. And she had to like really start to see people as individuals in order to be able to truly start changing hearts and minds in a way that was going to last and outlive her impact, you know? She says at one point, like, okay, I could, you know, use my Umbros powers to like force everyone to stop the violence and like be kind to each other. But is that really peace if they're not choosing it? You know, it's not. So how do we make them see each other as humans and treat each other as humans and care about each other? And that is hard to do if you're coming at it from a place of hate, even if that hate is justified.
Exactly. Absolutely. I love that. Okay, final question. How do you want all of us to feel when this whole series is over? And the reason I ask is, like, you know, I think about these iconic endings. Oh my
gosh.
And the way it left us feeling, and you know, do you like, I think about Hunger Games, and I would say the ending felt realistic in Hunger Games, but a lot of us hated it because it was a little too realistic. And after all of that heartache and hardship, we wanted them to have happiness at the end. And it was almost this like acceptance of the brokenness that there was, as opposed to true happiness, or you know, the Throne of Glass. Some people will say that not enough people died, and it's not realistic because
that's my camp. I agree.
Oh no, so you're warning us that you're in the reality camp.
No, I firmly believe that every character, how do I say this carefully? I think every character gets the ending that's right for them. And I've thought a lot, I mean, truly about every single individual character and like how does it make sense for them to end up when this story's over?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they all live. It doesn't mean all the good people live. And it doesn't mean all the bad people die. But I think that the way that things end is truly like the way it should end for each character. It's a fitting end, in my opinion, for each character. And so I hope that readers feel, even if they don't love everything that happens, I hope they feel at least satisfied that the characters got the ending that made sense for them, you know, and we may grieve some of them, or we may be angry that it wasn't worse or better or whatever. But that's life. And I do think it will be a hopeful ending. I don't want people to be like absolutely broken and devastated when it's over, even if they might be. But I want people to be hopeful for the future for all of them.
Okay. All right. I think I can handle that. I'm still that much more terrified heading into Burn Pen. But I think I can handle that.
You got to earn a happy ending, okay? Yes. You got to earn it.
That's right. That's right. I get it. Blood and sacrifice along the way.
Exactly.
All right. I love that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking time today, just answering some of these questions and diving into this, especially how does that impact us as readers in the real world? I just, I love these stories so much, and I love to escape the world. I think so many of us do by diving into a safe place, But I think it's that much more powerful when you allow these stories to impact your reality instead of just being an escape from reality.
I think so too.
So, well, thank you again. We can't wait to see you at the Everflame ball.
I'm so excited.
Do you know how you're going to dress for the Everflame ball?
I was just thinking about this.
Ooh,
I was talking with my assistant, Nicole, about this just the other day.
Yes.
And I got to go big, right? Like,
yes,
I have to.
Absolutely.
But I don't know exactly how yet. We'll see. Okay. I have a few ideas.
Okay.
I've got a massive... I don't want to give it away where it is. People go looking for it. I have a secret place on the internet where I'm collecting ideas.
Okay.
So I'm not thinking about it too much until Burn is out of the way. But I'm hoping to make a big splash. We'll see.
Oh, I'm so excited. No, okay. Have you been to a true fantasy ball before, or will this be your first?
I really haven't. I've been to a few conventions that sort of had ball elements to them, but never like a true ball. And I'm stoked. I'm so excited. We're gonna have so much fun. There's so many little surprises planned, and people don't even know how great it's gonna be. But I know, and I'm excited.
We know how incredible
we do.
Yes, that's so exciting. Is there one particular element you are most, how incredible that your first fantasy ball is about your series, your baby.
Crazy.
Is there something that you're most excited to experience about that?
I've been tagged by a lot of readers in their preparations and the things they're buying or the things they're making.
Yes.
And I can already tell that a lot of attendees are going all out. And I cannot wait to see everyone, in their costumes or in their dresses.
Absolutely.
I am so thrilled to see what everyone does with their outfits. I can't wait.
Oh, I know. There have been rumors about people becoming Soray and the wings and all this sort of stuff, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe
I cannot wait.
Because you invented this world, we're trying to bring it to life with the event, but each person coming and stepping into those characters, they have their own element of bringing this world to life in a way that you and I can't control, and it's so cool.
I love it. I want to see a bunch of DMs. I want to see a bunch of Saras. I want to see everybody you know, in their getup and even those who don't dress up, who just
Yeah,
come, you know,
absolutely.
I think it's going to be such a fun place. I'm very biased, obviously, but I think my readers are the best of any book series because there's just, you know, in my community, in my Discord, and just in the readers that I talk to, there's so much kindness
Yes.
and so much inclusivity. And
Yes.
I hear over and over again, every time I do signings, booksellers always tell me, oh my gosh, your fans are like the nicest people. Everyone was so kind and so wonderful. And I truly think that just some of the best people are attracted to these books.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be a night of just having a lot of fun and people making new friends and just a good space for everyone involved, I hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Safe space for everybody who loves this world.
Absolutely.
I love that so much. Well, I'm sure the readers that are attracted to the kind of author that mirrors them. And so I
Thank
have
you.
only ever heard incredible things about you and just your kindness and your generosity with your time and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, just from everybody across the board. And so thank you for being the kind of author who does not set yourself apart from the rest of us and, you know, not care about what we think and everything we want to tell you. And so I just thank you for caring about us as readers. We really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, it's my honor. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again for your time. I cannot wait to see you. It's like right about 4 months now.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that wild?
That is nuts.
I'm still figuring out my outfit. I think I also have like a unique idea in mind. I'm like, okay, how do I bring this to life? And so we've only got 4 months, but we can do it. So, but
awesome. I'm excited.
Have a wonderful day and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.